So our next presentation is going to be model-driven apps presented by our senior solutions consultant, Lyndsey Weber. And so now I am excited to hand things over to you, Lyndsey.
All right. Thanks, Brendan. Yep. Hey, everybody. I'm Lyndsey. I think like Ben and Brad have said, I've met a lot of the people on the call. So good to see your names. And I've seen quite a few that I haven't met either. So hopefully at some point I'll get to meet you as well. But I'm excited to be here with you today. And yes, we're going to talk about model-driven apps. And so I will go ahead and get my screen presented here. And we're going to start in PowerPoint, and then we will shift over to a little bit of Quantrix as well. So let's get this here in presenting mode, and we should be all set. All right, so kicking us off here, just a quick preview to what we're going to talk about. So I will explain a little bit about what you've heard mentioned a few different times already this morning about what do we mean by a model-driven app. I'll mention commercial CPQ. Again, that was something that Brad alluded to earlier today already. We'll jump in to do a little bit of Quantrix demoing, and then we'll come back here to break down some of the features from the demo model that hopefully you can incorporate into your own model-driven apps. All right, so what is a model-driven app? So we've all created these wonderful, complicated, but highly flexible Quantrix models, and it's time to share these models with different types of users. And so when we do that, it's a best practice to try and configure and present our models in a way that's tailored to how the different types of users need to interact with our model, right? And so this whole term of model-driven apps is really just a Quantrix model that's been overlaid with some context and some workflow, all keeping in mind how our different user types need to interact with our model. So it's really about creating a contextual, intuitive front end for a model, and you get a lot of benefits from this. I would say oftentimes when we're rolling out Quantrix at a new organization, or we've developed a new Quantrix model for a new group of people, having a front end layer that's interactive and intuitive for those users can help with improving adoption, increasing trust in your model, even things such as reducing the friction of handing over models to new people as people are changing throughout the organization. And then ultimately too, I think even as the model owner, the model creator, creating your model in the sense of building a model-driven app can actually help you manage and sustain that model's involvement over time too. So what are the three main activities that model-driven apps can help enable you to do with your models? And so I've broken these down into kind of three major action verbs here: share, guide, and decide. And so when we talk about sharing, as we've mentioned before, it's really about tailoring the experience of your Quantrix model to a user's given role. So maybe you've got people in your organization who are going to be entering in actuals or plans for budget, or maybe somebody needs to review scenarios or even create new scenarios. Or maybe, as has already been mentioned, maybe you're sharing parts of your model with an external customer. All of those different groups of people probably want to see different things in the model, and you might even have a different method to convey that information to them. So model-driven apps can really help you do that. From a guiding standpoint, we've already mentioned this word workflow. You'll hear me say it a couple times throughout this talk, but it's really helping the user walk through and navigate the different components of your model to complete the tasks that you've set out for them, even if that's just helping them understand what's been calculated in the model and what your key recommendations are for them. And then ultimately, right, for deciding. So the whole idea of building a Quantrix model and for building a model-driven app is to make it as easy and frictionless as possible for your users to build scenarios, use those scenarios to weigh alternatives, make decisions, and then ultimately push those decisions into production or operation. So let's talk a little bit about commercial CPQ. CPQ stands for configure, price, and quote. And this has actually been a growing use case among some of our largest Quantrix customers over the past, I would say, 12 to 16 months. So this is a really exciting space. CPQ is not a new term. We did not come up with that. CPQ is actually a pretty large market space with a lot of different technology already there. But we've kind of coined this term commercial CPQ because it really goes beyond a lot of the tools that you're seeing out there that are focused more on quote document generation, or our kind of a back of the house CRM tool. And with Quantrix, and particularly with model-driven apps in Quantrix, this commercial CPQ use case really enables sales teams to illustrate the value of their offerings to their customers in a meaningful way. So we think that Quantrix is actually enabling a competitive advantage in this space. So again, looking at kind of our 3 action verbs here, when we're talking about CPQ use cases, really the focus shifts to, again, how do you convey your unique value proposition to your customer in this case? So with a model-driven app that is CPQ focused, it's really about presenting that business case, oftentimes for a very complicated or a complex sale, to your customers in a way that makes sense and that they understand quickly what the value is that you're bringing. Also, we can utilize Quantrix, and you've seen a couple examples already, right, to help the customer see what information we need from them and help us to capture what those detailed requirements of their purchase and of the needs are that they need to be fulfilled, and hopefully can be fulfilled by the products that you're selling. With Guide, again, it's really giving the team or the users the ability to walk through scenarios, weigh alternatives, compare different product offerings or pricing offerings. And so this is something that I think not only can you directly give your end customer access to walk through a Quantrix app to do some of this exploration on their own, but you also are really able to enable the sales teams to do some of that negotiation and have that live conversation through the model to do that. And so, as we all know too, one of the other awesome benefits of Quantrix is the ability to lay the business logic underneath and the permissions. And so you can really empower sales and those people that are working with the customer and having those conversations to work on selling and providing that value, but within parameters and guardrails that have maybe been set up by other members of the organization. And then finally, for deciding, right, hopefully the idea here is that as we're presenting these different product offerings and features and values to the customer, that they're all oriented through the customer's primary KPIs. What do they see as being the value of making the purchase? And you're able to, of course, coordinate all of these conversations and these decisions with transparency, ultimately with the goal of making the purchase, right, completing the transaction. And we think that Quantrix can be the centralized tool to do a lot of that work. So we're going to switch over to Quantrix here in a second, and I want to show you just a demo model that we put together for this kind of use case. And I'm going to call out a couple different features in it, such as that kind of sequential selection of choosing products, guiding through on how you can compare different products, create different versions of a complex proposal, and then also how you could utilize Quantrix to maybe even recommend upsells to an end user or a customer as well. So I'll go ahead and flip my screen here, and we will switch into Quantrix. All right, and I'm going to pull us into full screen mode here. So again, this is a demo model. This is not a fully blown operational model. And I'll just kind of walk you through pieces here, and then we're going to really focus on what are all of the Quantrix features that you can incorporate to build a model-driven app, maybe like this one. So we are using trucking as our industry vertical here. And so just a couple things that I'll call out here to help with the navigation. I've set up a navigation menu over here that we'll walk through, where the user or the customer could configure each of the steps in their kind of optimal truck configuration for their business. And we'll talk through a couple of the other kind of financial modeling based benefits of this tool as well. But the whole idea here is that the customer or the salesperson could walk through this model with their customer to compare those different options and make their selections. And so maybe we pick our particular truck model here and we move on to the next step. So as I said in the PowerPoint, this is really not just about using Quantrix to make product selections. It's about how you position those product selections under the lens of what the customer is going to see the value from your product offering, okay? So the idea here with engines is fuel savings, right? So gas and fuel has been kind of volatile for the past several months. And so you can see a lot of swinging in margins depending on your fuel costs, especially if you're in this sort of trucking industry. So a user could come in here and maybe type in things like, well, how much do you spend on fuel? How many miles are logged by your truck fleet each year? What's your estimated miles per gallon or kilometers per liter, whatever your unit of measure might be. And so the user could come in here and we're essentially outputting for them what we would say their estimated fuel cost is each year for their existing engine. And here's why they should purchase a Tailwind truck engine. And so we offer maybe a few different types of engines with different horsepowers. And really what we're portraying over on the side here is don't just pick based off of horsepower, but let us show you how we can help you make the smartest decision on balancing that horsepower with maybe how much you want to try and save in fuel costs annually. So I'll make a selection here maybe on the 350 horsepower, and you can see the computed annual savings and monthly savings that our customer can expect to receive from making this choice with us. Next, I'll move to just another component here, cab and axles. And so what I want to point out is a couple things actually on this page. It's not overly interesting from a data perspective, but hopefully you're following kind of down here in the bottom left corner of my screen. We are giving a kind of a preview of our total quote cost as the customer's configuring this choice. But what I also want to show, and I'll pop this open and the text is probably a little bit small, but we offer as a company, as Tailwind Trucking, maybe 4 different cab designs or cab configurations. But in my drop-down box here, you'll see that there are only 3 cab options that are listed for me to choose from. So one of the things that's happening behind the scenes here is I have loaded in a hypothetical bill of materials or a list of my available product combinations for my truck. So maybe not every truck with every engine with every cab option is available. I've got different constraints based on design and performance and things like that. And so as hopefully you all have seen, and I'll show you a little bit, the ability to dynamically constrain inputs in a Quantrix model is also a really powerful tool for guiding a user through what the acceptable options are as they're configuring whatever these complex projects or products are. So I'll just make a couple of selections here for these components. Again, so the idea here, as we're working through all of these selections, and even if you aren't in the trucking space, I think we actually have a few customers that are, so this is kind of a fun conversation to have. But the idea is whatever your business is, I'm sure that you have a component that is focused on how do we convince customers and prospects that our product is valuable. And I think, again, the whole idea is how do you position that product in the lens of what is important to the customer. And so even something like suspension, right? You might say, well, depending on my truck's suspension system, I might be able to boost my truckload utilization, or maybe I can increase the uptime of my fleet. And so some of that might be associated a little bit to what your annual gross margin of your business is, right? And so the user could come in here and do some hypothetical estimating, compare and contrast those different options, and again, make the right choice for their business. And they can see front and center as they make that choice, what they're getting out of that selection, out of that agreement with us to hopefully buy. Where I want to spend a little bit of time is on this page. This is my favorite page, and we'll spend a little bit of time breaking this down in the PowerPoint later from a Quantrix feature perspective. But one thing that we've learned from our customers who are starting to utilize Quantrix for CPQ is beforehand, it was so difficult to identify places to upsell customers and show them additional value that they could get from their purchase. And part of the reason for that was because a lot of the existing selling processes for companies are spreadsheet and email based. And so there's not a lot of time or flexibility to step back and say, well, what else could we offer the customer, and how do we programmatically present that information to the customer? So what we've done here is offer the customer a few add-on accessories to their dream truck. And so the customer might say, yes, I absolutely want Ultra HD headlights. And as I make these selections, you'll notice a couple things are flashing and changing over here. But we could add a couple of these additional accessories to our purchase. And what's happening on the side here through the magic of Quantrix formulas and conditional formatting is we're actually suggesting to the customer which bundle they should purchase, because it's going to include the things that they want. They're going to get a slight discount, but of course, we're also going to sell them some additional things too. So everybody wins. So the customer could make these selections. And of course, our total quote is continuing to update dynamically. But we also give the user the ability to opt out, so they don't necessarily have to make those selections. But you'll notice when I click this box, I have some kind of crazy warning flashing signs going on here, which is, hey, I've checked the box for no accessories, but I've also got things where I've confirmed that I do want to purchase accessories. So there's a little bit of Quantrix functionality happening here to hopefully drive the user to pick one or the other, either keep the add-ons or say that they don't want any of them. All right. So again, kind of hitting the whole idea home here, but the whole point of using Quantrix for this commercial CPQ use case is to convey the value of the product and the offering that we are showing. So including things running in the backend here on payback period, ROI, and things like that. I'm going to kind of flash through these quickly, and we can talk more about them later as well. But there's so much cool functionality that you can really put in the hands of the end users or the customer to let them explore and, again, weigh those benefits and costs of using your product configuration. Even more so from a very detailed finance perspective, typically what we find is when a customer is looking to make a major investment in a project or a series of assets, is somebody in finance wants a very detailed breakdown of what's the impact of this purchase, not just the ROI, but what is the additional cost or the additional scaling up of the organization we're going to need to do. And so again, you can even include things like that in this Quantrix model. And so we try and equip the users and equip our Quantrix customers with the vision of how you could do something like this in your organization. Finally, leading to the final view my quote. Again, it's just one example of how you could present all this information to a user. We've got our one quote here. I could click a really cool scripted button in Quantrix to select a new quote. Now I've got a new option. I could come up here and kind of move a little bit faster through, make my choices for my different selections, right? Maybe I'll change my truck type to just to mix things up. And maybe instead of 8 units, I want to see what the total cost of 12 would be, right? So I've just made those selections quickly. We could, of course, come back here to view my quote, compare those two different quote options, look at the discounts we're receiving, and of course, the annual savings, and just look at those side by side and hopefully help the customer make the decision that's right for them. All right, so I'm going to jump back here to my PowerPoint, and I want to talk through what are all of those features that we just saw, because hopefully you can incorporate some of those into your model-driven apps as well. So we're going to break down specifically that add-ons, accessories, bundles canvas that we looked at. But the whole idea here is, while that app, that demo model might look kind of fancy and complicated, the truth is that all we're doing is really combining simple Quantrix features that you probably already know about, just to give the Quantrix model more of an interactive user experience perspective that we can share with our users. So here are the 4 things that we're going to look at. The first one is a scripted button that includes a simple enable condition. That's going to help us restrict navigation for the user as they're walking through the steps that we require of them. Constrained inputs really is going to take the guesswork out of what we want the user to provide for us. Conditional formatting, of course, is going to help us give visual indicators to the user on what it is that we're looking for, what we want to call attention to. And then we'll talk about dynamic expressions, particularly with text boxes on canvases that we can use to give clues and instructions to the users. All right, so here is our handy dandy add-ons canvas. And our first stop on the list here is our conditional scripted button, which you may or may not have noticed, but that button was grayed out on our canvas until we had completed the add-ons page. So you could not even access the quote details until you had completed all of your order configuration steps prior to that. So let's talk about that. So again, what is a scripted button? Why should we use it for model-driven apps? I would say that one of the main benefits of this is you're able to restrict navigation through your model based on milestones or business logic or tasks that you have outlined that are required by the user in your model. So here is our quote button, and I'm going to pop open a behind the scenes look here as to what's happening. So for that view my quote button, you can see I've got a very simple script, which by the way, you won't have to write anymore on your own with scripted smart buttons. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But you'll also notice that I've got an enable condition here at the bottom, which is pointing to a matrix. And really, in simple terms, an enable condition, when it's clicked, when it's enabled, is really just going to prevent the script from running. In this case, until my condition is met, which for me, this condition is that if my completion status, sum of those values is not equal to 0, then that button cannot be clicked and the user can't navigate to that perspective. So I've got that matrix pulled up on the side here. It's pretty straightforward. I've just listed out my different Canvas steps that I need the user to complete. And I've previewed just one of those formulas you've already seen is empty actually from Ben. We're using it slightly differently here, but just checking whether the required fields have been completed. By the way, the radio buttons that you saw on that page are also linked to this completion status matrix. So there's really not a whole lot of additional work that's required to make this look and feel of the model. It's really utilizing just kind of the 3 components, the scripted view my quote button, the completion status matrix, and then I've tied some radio buttons onto the canvas to track that synchronized as well. All right, next stop on our journey here is constrained inputs. So why do we want to use constrained inputs? I think this is a really commonly used feature by Quantrix customers. I use it all the time. I don't think I've ever made a Quantrix model where I didn't use constrained inputs somewhere. And I think the primary benefit of this, again, is to take some of the guesswork out of it for end users and also to circumvent chances for making mistakes, right? So we can predefine choices for end users. So you've seen this in a couple different places on that model. I made this very, very simple, where the user can only either leave this add field empty or they can click yes. And I've done that for a variety of different reasons. I don't want to add 17 headlights to a single truck unit. And so rather than having quantities, I have designed this model to be yes or no. And we're applying those add-ons to all of the trucks in their order. You could, of course, make this more complex in your model if you wanted to. So here's just a quick look, right? So the constraint input panel, I've just got a simple list of one value, it's yes. You could, of course, do something fancier in your model, of course. I wouldn't consider a checkbox to be the same type of constrained input, but I think it falls into the same kind of bucket, right? It's giving the user the ability to make some very easy decisions, and we're guiding them through that. In this case, it's to opt out of any additional purchases. I did mention that the dynamic constrained input is something that we're using quite a bit in this truck CPQ model, where we're dynamically updating the allowable choices of product components as the user walks through the different selections. And so if you're interested in seeing how we did that, you will get a chance to see that here in just a few minutes. And so if you're interested in how we did the dynamic list, stay tuned because we'll give you a chance to check that out. All right, so next up on the list here is conditional formatting. So this is, again, a very commonly used feature in Quantrix, but it's got a whole lot of power. So with conditional formatting, of course, you can not only recommend best options, but you can also do things like call attention to mistakes or really just point the user to the portion of the model that you want them to see. So in this particular case, we can focus on the purple box here. You can see that the road ready bundle is yellow, which means it's the recommended bundle that we have for the user. But the premium trim bundle is marked red, kind of angry, and has yes in it. And the reason for that is because on the other side of this canvas, we had checked the box saying, hey, I don't want any accessories. And I've set this up in the model to say you either want them or you don't. So we are calling attention to the fact that those are in conflict. So for the cells in the purple box, I've opened up the conditional formatting panel here for you to see. And I've actually got 2 conditional formatting rules applied to the same grouping of cells here. So of course, the top one here is what you're seeing in the angry red for the premium trim bundle, really just checking whether that box for opting out of accessories is checked. And if that's the case, and any of these bundles are marked as yes, we want to call attention for the user to say, hey, you've got to do one or the other, either clear the yes or uncheck the box. But we also have a second rule, and I think this is a really interesting thing that I often forget in Quantrix, is that you can apply multiple rules to the same set of cells in a Quantrix model, and simply reordering them will define which rule should take precedence. And so that, again, second rule here you're seeing is just pointing to which bundle recommendation we're making and calling that out to the user to hopefully make it clearer for them. The green shading here under Road Ready bundle is also the same thing, just simple conditional formatting pointing to which bundle we want to encourage the user to purchase. All right, last stop on our list here is dynamic text. So what about dynamic expressions and putting dynamic messages into your Quantrix model? Why should we do it? What is the benefit from a model-driven app perspective? Well, I think displaying a message to the user when certain conditions are met can be really helpful. And I think it's something that helps bring some personality even to your models as well and makes things hopefully very intuitive for the user. So the first place where this was used on this page was actually where we suggest the Road Ready bundle. So I've kind of given you the preview feature here. Again, this is a super basic way of setting a dynamic expression within a text box on a canvas to present information from your model. And so this bundle rec matrix I've popped up on the right here, it's pretty simple. You can see I've got an item here for where I'm calculating based on some rules and some logic I've set up in the background, which bundle we want the user to purchase. And then I've got the bundle discount associated with that also displayed. Now here in my kind of save 10% discount sticker on my canvas, I didn't use a text expression. I literally just dragged that 10% cell from the bundle rec matrix over into my canvas. So just a reminder that this is not the only way to make your models interactive. There are truly dozens of different ways that you can use simple Quantrix features and combine them to make something that seems really slick and really powerful to the user. I have one more example of this that I just want to show you, and we've seen this a couple times already. So my red text message that pops up here, this only appears again when we've had that checkbox enabled for, hey, I don't want any accessories, but somewhere on this page I've said, yes, I do want an accessory. And so what's happening here, of course, is some logic underneath to trigger this warning, but only when there is a yes condition and when the checkbox has been enabled. So I don't recommend usually putting something this complex in the text box on a canvas, but just to prove that you can, this is actually what is residing within that clear your add-on selections message that's displayed on the canvas here. So you can combine Quantrix functions, rules, logic, and actually embed that in a text box on a canvas to do some dynamic work. And I would actually say that if you have something kind of complicated like this, it's probably easier just to put this exact formula logic in a cell in a model, and then just drop that cell onto your canvas so that you can display it there, and it's pretty easy. But there's lots of different ways to manage that sort of information in your Quantrix model. All right, I know I'm at almost the 5-minute mark, so we're going to wrap up here quickly with just one more thing. And again, if you've been with us so far for the morning, you have already seen a brand new feature. I'm so excited about smart buttons. I'm going to use these all the time. And we want to make it as easy as possible for you to build these types of model-driven apps as well. So introducing new smart buttons. I'm so excited, and I just want to show you a quick example again of how you might use these in your Quantrix model. So I am going to switch over here back to our infamous add-ons canvas here. And so as Brad demoed earlier, I'm just going to pop this open. This is the new and improved scripted button menu. You've got tons of pre-configured options. So all of these buttons I had to make originally on my own. I could just add these open canvas buttons directly here. Super easy now, saves me a bunch of time. But in this case, I'm actually going to add a next button, bring that over, and then I'm going to also add a previous button right here. And as Brad had shown, what's so cool about these buttons is as you add additional canvases or more components to your model, these buttons are automatically going to detect from your model browser the order and the sequence of those canvases. So I can actually flip backwards and forwards using these buttons. And it's just so easy to configure, and all of that scripting has already been written for you. So you can just literally drag and drop these previous and next buttons straight onto your canvas. And quite frankly, with the addition of these new smart buttons, I'm probably going to simplify my navigation menu over here. But I think a cool thing about these is they work together as well. So you can get as fancy or keep it simple depending on what your use case is and what your users need for how you want them to interact with your model. So super excited about these buttons. I think they're going to be awesome, and can't wait for you guys to use them and to hear what you guys think about those as well. So I am going to close here. I'm going to pop open this screen, and then I can pass it over to Brendan to see if we've got any questions. But if you are really interested in picking apart the truck CPQ model, or you want to peek under the hood, pun intended, you can actually download that model that we looked at today, and we can put that link in the chat, but I've displayed it here as well if you want to just take a quick picture of that. And of course, open for any questions, but if you think of something later too, I would love to hear from you as well. So I've popped my email up on this page too, but thank you guys.
Awesome job, Lyndsey. Thank you. It's great seeing that model and the behind the scenes. So here's a quick question for you. At what point in the process should a model be converted to an app, and how do you make sure the presentation layer remains flexible and scalable?
Yeah, I really like this question. I spend a lot of time building kind of the presentation layer of models, partially because I really enjoy that. And I think one of the key things is making sure that you understand your user audience, right? I think that the presentation layer should be one of the last things that is built in a model. And I think as you're building out the architectural components of the model, that can help give you the insight as to what you need to do to create a valuable model-driven app. And so I think that the presentation layer, creating the app, should always come last. It should come after your Quantrix model has been fully built. For the second part of the question, it is a challenge because Quantrix models evolve over time, and it's very common for us to talk with users like you that you've expanded the model, or you've added a new component, or a canvas has changed. And we want to make that as easy as possible for you as an app builder, and also for your end users to interact with those models and make those evolutions of the app over time. So I think one of the things that I'm really excited about is this focus that we've had on smart buttons. I think that's a first step that we're making to help increase the flexibility and the agility of building out and evolving the app component of your model over time. So I think design should be thought of at the beginning when you are embarking on building a model. And I think, not to use a cliche term, but making sure that you understand the user experience and the audience you're building the model for should not only direct how you design your matrices and how you write your formulas, but you should also be considering how is this all going to get wrapped up into an end user design that will hopefully boost the usability and the adoption of your model over time.